Against the backdrop of Jacob's very flawed family, Joseph's inspirational story stands out. The book of Genesis devotes 13 chapters to his dramatic chronicle. That's about a quarter of the entire book. His narrative provides us with an example of a young man from an unstable family who chose to rely on God when so much of his future seemed hopeless. We quickly learn that Joseph's 10 older brothers resented him. As the biological son of Rachel, the wife Jacob loved most, Joseph was his father's favorite son. This is most clearly shown by the special coat that Jacob gave to Joseph. This favoritism eventually brought serious trouble for the whole family. And if their father's favoritism wasn't reason enough, God gave Joseph special dreams. Dreams in which Joseph unwisely relayed to his brothers. His brothers understood Joseph's dreams to mean that one day they would all bow down to him, their little brother. Joseph's brothers were determined to make sure that would never happen. And it's not much of a surprise to the reader that his mischievous siblings began plotting to kill him. Joseph's brothers were shepherds in the land of Canaan. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to search for his brothers who were tending the flocks in the fields. After traveling about 20 miles from Shechem to Dothan, Joseph found them. But Joseph finds himself isolated and vulnerable, so his brothers seized upon the chance to kill him. After the brothers argue amongst themselves on how to commit the deed, only Joseph's brother Reuben voices any opposition to actual fratricide. Unable to make an immediate plan, the brothers throw Joseph into a pit and subsequently sit down for a meal while they attempt to reach an agreement. As a caravan of merchants is traveling nearby, Judah convinces the brothers to sell Joseph to them. The brothers conspire to hide their wicked deed from their father Jacob by taking Joseph's coat and dipping it in goat's blood. Armed with a story that Joseph had been killed by an animal, they confronted their father with their forged evidence in hand. When Jacob sees the coat, he rends his own clothes and grieved inconsolably. Jacob was convinced that his beloved son, Joseph, had been killed. While the brothers' deception is successful, the reality is that Joseph, who had been sold to Ishmaelite slave traders, was just beginning his journey. His destination, Egypt. After a brief interlude in Genesis chapter 38, a particularly dark episode that we won't be able to cover on this platform, the biblical narrative focuses back on Joseph in chapter 39. Joseph has arrived in Egypt, more specifically the house of Potiphar. The narrator gives us Potiphar's substantial credentials as he is an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Although Joseph is in a foreign land, God is with him, so much so that Potiphar recognizes this because Joseph succeeds at everything he does. Potiphar makes Joseph the overseer of his house and all that he owns. And for the moment, things are going well for Joseph. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." Apparently Joseph, in addition to being an excellent administrator, was also a handsome dude. And Joseph's good looks caused Potiphar's wife to take more than a professional interest in him. Potiphar's wife makes, we'll call them, romantic propositions towards Joseph. But out of respect for Potiphar, Joseph rejects the advances. Evidently, Joseph has broken the mold of questionable character demonstrated by his brothers in previous chapters, and he continuously spurns the woman's advances. This fact greatly upsets the temptress, and she frames Joseph for attempted, let's say, unconventional overtime. In the scheme to entrap Joseph, the woman snatches Joseph's garments as he fled the staged crime scene. She shows the captured clothes to the other servants in the house and shows the evidence to her husband Potiphar. Stoking the racial tension that existed between the Egyptians and Hebrews, she succeeds at rousing their anger towards Joseph. As a slave in Egypt, Joseph had no legal rights and was immediately thrown into prison for his alleged crime. Once again, Joseph has found himself the unwitting victim of a malevolent scheme. But once again, we see God is with Joseph. Joseph has been thrown into prison, but is subsequently put in charge of all the other prisoners. After serving some time in the ancient Egyptian slammer, the overseer, Joseph, will meet a pair of fellow high-profile prisoners, the Pharaoh's baker and the Pharaoh's cupbearer. And in our next episode, they will tell Joseph about their very troubling dreams. This will set the stage for Joseph's job interview of a lifetime. Previously on Bible Stories 101, 2 senior royal attendants have just been imprisoned for offending Pharaoh. One morning, Joseph saw they'd been perplexed and asked what was troubling them. The baker and the cupbearer proceed to explain their dreams to Joseph. Joseph correctly interprets the dreams and gives God all the credit for his talent. The dreams turn out to be prescient when the baker is executed days later, and the cupbearer is spared and restored to his previous office. Joseph asks the cupbearer to remember him, but unfortunately, he forgets about Joseph for a full 2 years. That is until the Pharaoh himself begins having troubling dreams. The Pharaoh is desperate to understand these visions, so he called on all the magicians and wise men of Egypt to interpret them, but they all failed. It's only then that cupbearer remembers Joseph, and the Pharaoh hastily summons him from prison. Joseph hears the dreams and, with his talent on loan from God, correctly interprets the dreams to be prophetic as well as imminent. 7 years of abundance are coming to the land, followed by 7 years of an egregious famine. Joseph emphasizes that these are divine visions from God himself, and that God will fulfill the vision soon. Joseph advises the Pharaoh that he should begin preparing for the impending natural disaster by storing mass quantities of food. Pharaoh was so impressed with Joseph that he immediately released him from prison and put him in charge of preparations for the coming famine. Joseph is not only promoted, but he has become second in command of the entire kingdom, and in effect is the second most powerful person in the entire world, second only to the Pharaoh himself. Joseph excels at his role of Prime Minister of Egypt. In their 7 years of abundance, Egypt stored all the food they would need in anticipation of the famine. And when the 7 years of plenty came and went, a terrible famine swept across the region. As the famine continued, people from all over the region came to Joseph for relief. It's about this time when a family in Canaan grows desperate and sends a band of brothers south to buy food. The sons of Israel are about to have the most awkward family reunion ever. Previously on Bible Stories 101, famine ravages the land and Egypt has prospered as people from all the lands surrounding Egypt have come to buy food, filling the kingdom's coffers. Joseph, now known as Zaphenath-Paneah in Egypt, was happily married and enjoying all the comforts as prime minister of the world's most powerful nation. Life was good, but yet again, it was about to get complicated. Joseph's brothers had come to Egypt to buy grain. It had been many years since they sold him into slavery, so when they met Joseph, they did not recognize him. He did recognize them, however, and decided to test them to see if they had changed. Initially, he accused them of being spies. Then he sold them grain only on the condition that Simeon stay as a hostage until they returned with Benjamin, the youngest brother who had stayed behind with Jacob their father. Upon returning to Canaan, the brothers told their father Jacob of their experiences. He vowed not to send Benjamin to Egypt, but the continuing famine forced him to change his mind. And on the next trip, Benjamin went with his brothers to Egypt. When they arrived, Joseph treated them royally, weeping openly at the sight of his youngest brother. Simeon was returned to them, and after purchasing grain, they started home. But on their way, they were stopped by one of Joseph's servants. He accuses them of stealing Joseph's silver cup, and the cup is found in Benjamin's bag, where Joseph had placed it. The brothers returned to face Joseph, who declared that Benjamin must stay in Egypt. At this point, Judah pleaded with Joseph, saying that it would break their father's heart if Benjamin didn't return home with them. Judah's offering to stay in Benjamin's place is one of the most moving passages in the Old Testament. Overcome with emotion, Joseph revealed himself as their brother. At first, the brothers were afraid that Joseph would take revenge against them, but were soon convinced of Joseph's genuine forgiveness. Judah's plea on Benjamin's behalf was evidence of the change that Joseph had hoped to find in his brothers. After being sent back to Canaan with gifts for their father, the brothers tell him of Joseph's invitation to return to Egypt as a family. So after Jacob receives assurance from God that they'll be safe there, the family accepts Joseph's invitation. Joseph's story arc ends with his choosing forgiveness over retribution. Facing trial after trial, Joseph always trusted God, and that God's plan would succeed in spite of human sinfulness.